Hi, my name is Alicia Wolf, and today I'm going to be talking to you about a pioneer in the research of applied behavior analysis, Fred Simmons Keller. Fred Simmons Keller was born on January 2nd, 1899 in Laurel Grove, New York. And as a young boy, his family moved around often, and he didn't particularly take to school, which is interesting after we review some of his later research that would come along. And he passed the time in his high school years working as a Western Union telegraph operator. And then in 1918, he enlisted in the United States Army, where he would serve in the last year of World War I. Beginning his education, Keller attended Harvard University as a psychology graduate student in 1926. He received instruction from well-known teachers such as E.G. Boring and W.S. Hunter. And he was the roommate of B.F. Skinner, who was also a fellow graduate student at that time. In his teaching and research career, after graduating from Harvard, he received a job working at Colgate University. In 1938, he went to the staff at Columbia University, and he taught there for 26 years and would retire for the first time. While there, he developed a laboratory and curriculum for students entering the field of behavior where students could use their own RAT and apply behavior techniques. And he collaborated with individuals such as John Volkman, Thomas Rees, and later William Schoenfeld. After he retired from Columbia University, he went to Brazil to educate those in the field of ABA. He went to Arizona State University, the Institute for Behavioral Research in Maryland, Western Michigan, and then ended his career in Georgetown University, where he retired for the second time in 1976. Keller contributed over 80 research articles, and he wrote 7 books on ABA. His research areas of focus were the use of reinforcement for code reception, his reinforcement theory with rats, where he kind of builds upon Skinner's research with pigeons. And he also developed the personalized system of instruction, or also known as the Keller plan. He received awards and honors more so later in his career, between 1964 and 1976. Some of those highlighted in 1964, he received the title of Emeritus of Psychology. He was also given the Certificate of Merit by President Truman for his contribution during World War II with the voice-over method for teaching code reception in Morse code, and received some honorary medals and certificates as well later on in his career. His research on code reception is very interesting to read. He used a system of immediate reinforcement in order to help individuals better receive the code reception for Morse code. And what would happen, there would be a presentation of a signal, and then students were given a 3-second window in order to write down the correct signal based on what they heard. Then after the 3-second time had elapsed, the instructor provided the correct digit or letter, and then students corrected it as needed. In order to achieve mastery, they had to reach 95% with 95% of corrections, and then across 3 consecutive runs. And there were multiple runs done within a day. They found that there were common errors that contributed. A lot of the signals had common properties, so they were overused. So Keller contributed that to generalization of the stimulus. And some were, one was noted as reversals, which would be, they were direct mirrors of each other. And then inversion, where the dots and dashes were just the opposite of each other. And then there were dotting errors made when the dot quantity and size was mistaken for another. So some of the digits or letters would have several dots that went with them, and they were confused as when they were presented with too many or too less. This is an example of a sheet that the students would use in order to record their signals. And the top, they would work left to right, and on the top is where they would, when they were given the signal during those 3-second time window, they would write down whatever signal they felt corresponded with what they heard, and sometimes they were left blank if they didn't know. The second line is the corrections made once the instructor gave them the correct signal. So the goal, in order to reach that 95% mastery, is most of these needed to be blank in order to move on to the next level. And here is just a reflection of the hours of training that was required for 48 students to master the 36 Morse code. And they found that it was more effective. Originally, students were just repeating the signal back immediately, whereas Keller kind of changed things using that voiceover method, providing that immediate reinforcement of the signal, and students recorded it and they could get that immediate feedback of how they were doing. Keller continued to build upon this research, constantly trying to perfect and reduce the amount of errors in the code reception. He also built off Skinner and Wertheimer's research, where they were looking at phonetic equivalents to match the dot dash signal, and they were using seeing if a different word list other than what was originally used would be more effective. Whereas you could see Keller developed a final list in the third third column of the word list here. Next is the personalized system of instruction, or the Keller plan. And the way this was designed was, and Keller kind of prided himself on teaching. That was kind of his area of focus. He liked self-paced instruction, and this was kind of built off his aversion to the teaching style where the teacher was always talking. So it was self-paced. Students could work at the speed in which they needed in order to learn. And it was individualized students. It was more one-on-one. And the students received instant feedback of progress, and the feedback for instruction based on student performance. And again, as I mentioned, he didn't particularly like the lecture style where the students were just constantly listening and felt they needed a more active involvement in their learning, which we've kind of seen in today's world and working in education. The way the program was designed, there would be an instructor, an assistant, and a proctor. And the proctor is the one that mostly interacted with the students. And it was typically an undergraduate student who had already taken the course and done well in the course, and they were chosen to help for another course later on down the road. This was helpful for students because they could find somebody relatable who's already been through the program that they could talk to. And students were provided all the course material except for the textbook. They had to get that on their own. And they had to complete a certain level of mastery before they could go on to the next unit. So they worked for different units, and they had to get a certain achieve a certain goal on their test in order to get the next unit. However, even though all students worked at a different pace to get to certain units, they all had to achieve all of the units by the final exam, and it was given on the same date at the same time. There were 4 testing opportunities weekly, and the way that was designed is for students who worked at a quicker pace, they could take more unit tests and move on, whereas students were a little bit slower and may needed another chance. They could go back and retake the test, or if they missed a day, or they could have the opportunity to take the test again. Again, students worked at their own pace. There were optional class meetings. It's typically a study hall environment where students could come and listen to some lectures or have a discussion. When they took the test, it was individualized, and if they didn't reach the certain level of mastery, they could go back and study and take again during one of the 4 sessions that were offered. They also could defend their answers, and this would allow for the student to kind of brainstorm their thoughts to the teacher, and the teacher could understand how the student was interpreting the material and applying it, and maybe giving some feedback or thoughts for the tests in the future courses. The benefit students reported working harder in order to learn the material to meet the mastery requirements, and students enjoyed the learning style of the course and how the content material was presented. They liked the instant feedback on their progress. They knew where they stood, and then they liked the proctor being there so that they could relate to them in their experience. And teachers liked the one-on-one setting style, and they liked the instant feedback of what content was more difficult for students, how they progressed, and if the test items needed to be more clarification in the questions, or if other questions needed to be thrown out or improved. This is just a little video that I found on Fred S. Keller in an interview about PSI, and it wasn't very widely received, and it just talks about his perceptions on it, and it's just we'll show a short glimpse of it.
Enough by everyone. I overlooked some facts. I overlooked some important facts. Things do not go as quickly as we would like. Things do not change as quickly as we would like, or as drastically as we would like. And I'm not certain, now I say this very carefully, I'm not certain that we can change them to a sufficient degree without some outside help. I don't know what kind of a miracle is required. I think that we have had great success in convincing individual teachers who really like to teach, who have the good of their pupils at heart. We've had great success with them. They have done what they could. That is not always what they want to do. They have done what they could, and they've improved their teaching.
Okay, that's just a short glimpse. You can always go back to the video and review further examples that he gives in regards to what teachers and educational reform might look like in his eyes. But that's just a short glimpse of his view on PSI, which wasn't always well received. And he was talking about his underestimation of how critics didn't like the plan. In my interview, I was unable to do that with Fred Keller. He passed away at the age of 97 on February 2nd in 1996 due to cancer. Some interview questions that I would like to know is, his start in becoming a researcher, his primary area of interest, and how that changed over time, things I should know beginning as a future behavior analyst, and then with PSI, does he feel like educational reform is still needed? Are we taking steps in the right direction? What needs to be done further in order to improve it? His impacts in research, he developed useful teaching methods for the introductory courses in the field of behavior analysis. His work in reinforcement validated other researchers, such as Skinner's research with pigeons, whereas Keller used rats. His method of reinforcement and code reception helped improve instruction for future generations in Morse code. And his research findings we still use today as foundational principles in the field of behavior analysis. And then, of course, the PSI method influenced individuals to design schools using behavior analysis. And also, I think we can see some applications in online courses of how that design has influenced today. And here is a glimpse of Keller 2 years before he passed away, visiting one of the schools that was named after him, the Fred S. Keller School in Yonkers, New York. These are the references I used in order to make this presentation, and I thank you for watching.